this is it. This is the super anticlimactic super secret video. Hey guys, I'm Allie and welcome back to my channel. So I decided to challenge myself. Way back in like November, I was like, when all the Goodreads news was coming out and people were voting, I was like, I'm gonna read all the winners. I'm gonna read all the winners. I basically was like waiting for December 4th when they announced the winners, and I was like, I'm gonna start from there. I'm gonna be done mid-January. What a joke. And I'm gonna read all the winners, and I have some expectations and things like that. Then I'm gonna get into some stats and stuff. But I also have a vlog video, so you can see like my reactions of books as I'm reading them and right after I finish them, and see some of my thoughts and feelings there. This is just going to be like my plain old wrap-up style. You can click around to whatever books you want to see. I decided to just do a plain wrap-up one as well, just because I haven't talked about these books in any of my wrap-ups. So that's all what I'm going to do. Also, my thoughts have changed at least on maybe one or two of these since my vlog, but you guys are more than welcome to check that out as well. Probably not as interesting as I thought it was going to be, and I got super nervous because Kayla over at Books and Lala had posted that she read all the like mystery thriller ones that were in that you could vote for, and I was like, oh my god, she's gonna beat me to the video. Oh dear. Apparently I'm the only one crazy enough to attempt this with the statistics. Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys some things. Basically, first of all, let's talk about the winners and what I've read, what I haven't, what's on my actual TBR, things like that. Okay, so in fiction, Still Me, my Jojo Moyes had won. In mystery, The Outsider by Stephen King had won. Historical, it was The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. Fantasy was Circe by Madeline Miller. Romance was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. I hope that I'm saying that right. Sci-fi was Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. Horror was Elevation by Stephen King. The Best of the Best was The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. The only one that I have read out of this grouping is The Hate U Give. Of those, The Great Alone, The Kiss Quotient, Vengeful, and Elevation were already on my TBR. Now I do own a copy of The Kiss Quotient, so there's that. But I don't own any of the other copies. I was waiting to get a copy of Vicious before I even read Vengeful. I've been kind of putting off The Great Alone, and Elevation was a recent TBR ad for me. So then moving along, we had Humor was The Last Black Unicorn by Tiffany Haddish. Nonfiction is I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and this is by Michelle McNamara. The memoir was Educated by Tara Westover. The biography was The Good Neighbor by Maxwell King. Science was The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs by Steve Bruchade. For the cookbook, it was Hungry for More Cravings. This is by Chrissy Teigen. Poetry was The Witch Doesn't Burn in This One by Amanda Lovelace. And for graphic novel, it was Herding Cats by Sarah Anderson. I hadn't read any of these. None of them were on my TBR. As you can tell, most of these are nonfiction. I have no need to read nonfiction. It's not a thing that I tend to gravitate towards. I hate poetry, and the graphic novel is just not one that I would normally gravitate to. Moving on, we have the debut was Children of Blood and Bone by Tommy Adeyemi. YA fiction was Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Albertalli. YA fantasy was Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas. The middle grade was Trials of Apollo. This was The Burning Maze by Rick Riordan. And then for the picture book, it is I Am Enough by Grace Byers. So then of these, I had only read one of them, which was Kingdom of Ash. And then Children of Blood and Bone was originally on my TBR. I had no reason to read any of the other ones. Picture books aren't really my thing. I had decided pretty early on that the only one I was not going to read was the cookbook. I did take the cookbook home and I looked at it, and I will say I definitely don't think it was a cookbook for beginners. I don't think that they were easy meals, and a lot of them included more than 10 ingredients. So I would never ever use any of those. I didn't think that it was user friendly. So the cookbook was the one thing I wasn't going to read. Out of the, I think there was 21, I had only read 2. So I knew I was in for it. But to be fair, I'm really glad that I had read Kingdom of Ash, because that would have involved 7 books beforehand, because I did have to, a lot, some of these were series. Still Me was the 3rd in a series, Vengeful is the 2nd in a series, and then Burning Maze was a 3rd in a series. So I knew I was going to have extra books to read on top of that. I did talk about those books in my wrap-up, so After You, Vicious, The Hidden Oracle, and The Dark Prophecy, I ended up enjoying all those. So there was no problems there. Of course, it wasn't nice having that added on factor to it, but I'm not including them into the rest of the statistics here. So let's talk about some of my expectations for this journey. One is I would find things out of my comfort zone and I would end up enjoying them, considering that these should be the best of the best. Because I am essentially reading the best of the best, these are things that people just have overall really enjoyed, they love. I would end up giving these mostly anywhere between a 3.5 and a 5 stars. Gave myself a little bit of leeway. I wasn't expecting to give these all 5 stars. One, because I know some of them are not in my comfort zone, but also because my ratings might not be the same as someone. Like, I'm not going to enjoy the same things that other people enjoy, but considering that so many people, and I'm assuming so many people of various reading, don't they know I'm doing a very important video? So I do want to give myself some leeway in the ratings. I consider a 3 still a pretty good rating, but it is in the middle. I would consider anywhere from a 3.5 to a 5 a good ass rating. Like, the books that I really love, I will give anywhere between a 4 and a 5. So considering that these should be really good books, they should be anywhere between a 3.5 and a 5. Because I don't think I actually voted for any of the winners. But because I believe that I have excellent taste in books, I assumed that the things that I had voted for would at least make it into the top 5 for those categories. So we will get into that too. Because I hadn't voted for any of the winners, I assumed that upon reading these books, I would want to change at least some of my answers to the winner. So because I hadn't read the winner, I didn't vote for it maybe, and so upon reading it, I might want to change my answer to the winner. That was the assumption there. And then the last thing is that I would find a new book, and this is kind of going back to the first thing, but I would find a new book that I wouldn't have normally picked up, and it would become a new favorite or something that I just really loved that I would have never read in the first place. Let's go ahead. First, I am going to talk about my picks. That's why we know, and then at the end I'll tell you guys whether or not I felt the need to change those. So my picks, I had voted in the mystery category, I had voted for The Last Time They Lied, and this actually was 18th in the winners thing, which blew my mind because it's such a fantastic book, and I feel like Final Girls was so amazing and so many people read it that I would assume that they would have picked up The Last Time I Lied, and I enjoyed The Last Time I Lied a lot more than Final Girls, so this just blew my mind that it was 18th on the list. For fantasy, I had voted for Beneath the Sugar Sky. This was 7th. For the best of the best, I had to vote for The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman because it is one of my all-time favorite books, and it was 8th. I could see, I honestly wouldn't have known what to expect in this category because it is the best of the best and everyone's going to have their opinion on this. Am I surprised that The Hate You Give won? No, I'm not. I could see where The Ocean at the End of the Lane might not appeal to them as much as The Hate You Give, especially because The Hate You Give is such an important story, whereas The Ocean at the End of the Lane is more entertainment. So I can understand this one a little bit, but it's still my fave. For graphic novel, I picked Saga, and let me tell you how freaking surprised I was that this was not number 1. How was this not number 1? Everyone loves Saga. People who don't even read graphic novels read Saga. Like, Saga is that graphic novel. So moving on to debut, I had picked The Woman in the Window because, one, I read it, loved it, it just blew me away. I also know that it has been on Hold's list at the library. The Hold's list has been over 40 people long at any given time over the past year, which is saying something because normally it will dwindle down, but it just keeps adding. Like, the list is never ending. I was very surprised that this did not win, but it was 2nd. And for young adult, I had picked Sadie, and this was 2nd, which actually surprised me because I had felt like Sadie was such an underhyped book. It kind of blew up there for like 2 weeks and then no one talked about it again. Then for YA Fantasy, and I knew this wasn't going to win, but I still had to try my dang on hardest. I had picked Dread Nation. I love Dread Nation. I thought it was such a refreshing take. It's based around the Civil War and there's zombies. Like, how could I not love that? I was up for win. I knew Sarah J. Maas was going to win. I did not realize that Dread Nation would be 12th. So that took a little bit of a blow. And this is a picture book that I do love. I have read before and I just think it is so cute. It's about a gay bunny and I love him so much. But it is the day in the life of Marlon Bundo. I am honestly surprised that this was second, mostly because I live in a very conservative area, so this book probably would not fly. However, I was very excited that this was second. I don't know much about picture books, but I did enjoy Marlon Bundo, and I am happy that he was second place. Out of my picks, which I had done 8, so 4 out of the 8 were in the top 5. So 50% of my picks had been in the top 5. I didn't vote for anything that I hadn't read, obviously, so I didn't get to vote in all the categories, but it was interesting to see that, you know, how varying, because I had those ones that were in the top 5, they were like in the top 2, but then I had the ones that weren't in the top 5 that were like at the very bottom. So it's interesting to see how that works. Obviously, it does nothing for the study. I just thought it was an interesting thing to look at. So, alright y'all, let's go ahead and let's get into the wrap up. I am just going in order of which they were listed on the site as winners. So we're starting off with the fiction winner, which was Still Me. So Still Me by JoJo Moyes is the third in the series. This follows Louise Clark. I feel like anyone knows the premise of Me Before You, which is that it's a young girl she's not a young girl, she's a young woman. She takes on the role of being the caregiver for this very grumpy quadriplegic. And of course it's the part romance and you get to learn about Louise and all these other things. I don't know how to continue telling you about the series without giving away major spoilers. I will just say that I gave Me Before You 5 out of 5 stars. They're slower paced books because they're very much about the mundane life, but there's just something about the way JoJo Moyes writes these that makes them so extremely relatable, and just she gets those very mundane feelings in small things and just really knows how to capture them and make you stick to that in, like, I don't know, like you can see yourself in Louise's place all the time. After You, 4 stars, and I ended up giving Still Me 3.5. So this was a small decline in the series. I don't ever think that it needed to be a series. I was pretty okay with it just being a standalone. In fact, that's how I was going to leave it before this video. But I am happy that I read them. I enjoyed the series a lot more than I thought I would. Again, it's mundane. It's about Louise. In Still Me, she ends up taking a job in New York and she's struggling between this life that she has created in New York and also the life that she has left behind and trying to keep those things together, but it's not working out so well. And this one was a little different in that it involves a little bit of a love triangle. I don't like love triangles. You kind of know how this one's going to work out to begin with, but I just love seeing her progression as a person and her finding her way. She's very much one of those people that just seems like she's always stuck in that moment in her life, which is so understandable because who is constantly progressing? Like, there's weeks at a time where all I do is watch Netflix and does absolutely nothing for my personal gain. So I understand those parts, and it was nice to see how her life went forward. Would I have considered this the best of fiction? No. I'm actually surprised because most of the reviews on this weren't even good reviews. So I don't know how this managed to win. It didn't seem like all that many people were interested in reading Beyond Me Before You. I don't know. It was okay. It was a good book. I enjoyed it. 3.5 stars. Was it a winner? Probably not. Next we have the mystery winner, which was The Outsider by Stephen King. This was one of the biggest books on this TBR, coming in at a whopping 561 pages. I decided to listen to the audiobook. This is a strange, strange story, okay? So the first half of this story was a good mystery, and if it would have stayed that way, it would have been probably a fantastic book. It is about this young boy who he is found dead. He has been brutally killed. He has been brutally raped. And it all comes down to everyone that has witnessed this boy being kidnapped, and all the evidence surrounding him all comes around this baseball coach. And so we get to hear this baseball coach side of the story. He's like, I wasn't there, like, I was somewhere else, and it wasn't me, there's no way it could be me, but his prints are everywhere, his DNA is in places, and everyone swears that they saw him. And he's like, there's no possible way. I predicted the end of this book within the first 15 pages. For a book that has 500 and some pages, do you think I'm going to predict it in the first 15? Because what am I supposed to do with the rest of those 550 some pages? So, if it would have just been that way, I do feel like a little bit of the violence that had happened to the young boy was just for the grotesqueness. It was for shock value. It didn't do anything to the story. I felt like Stephen King was being gross for the sake of being gross. I really don't think that it did anything for the story, especially because it is repeated and said over and over again what has happened to this boy, and it's like, we don't need, just say he was raped. You don't have to go into all these gross details about it, because I don't think it did anything for the storyline. Once you reach the halfway point and the police investigation takes a very strange turn, things just went downhill so quickly. There's a supernatural element, which I assumed pretty early on. I assume anyone would assume, considering the title is The Outsider. What else do you expect? This just took a really weird turn. It began to drag a lot. We follow some weird things that are happening, and so much of it was just so over the top, so unbelievable. Just, it was not set up in a good way. Like, I didn't understand it. It just didn't work with the story. I would have much rather just stuck to a plain murder mystery. It was good in that sense. The writing was good besides like the overgrossness. That was a good story, but then we got into this supernatural aspect, and you can tell it's like right in the midway point, it just switches over to this totally different writing, this totally different story, and it just got so freaking weird. And there's just, there was just too much strangeness and grossness for the sake of being gross, for shock value. It was predictable. I honestly just stopped wanting to read anymore, but I felt the need to continue because I had made it that far. It was interesting up to that far, and then it just got really freaking strange. I ended up giving this a 2.5 out of 5 stars, and honestly, that's probably being generous because of how much I dislike this book. Like, I'm literally giving it the 2 stars based on the first half of the book. The rest of it just took all the points, like, away. Am I totally surprised this one? Yes and no, because it's Stephen King. I assumed that his name is the reason it won, not because it was a good book, because it wasn't a good book. Next we have historical, was The Great Alone. I definitely could have seen this one winning. I know everyone was raving about this. This is about a young girl. It follows a young girl, Lena. Her parents moved to Alaska. Her dad was in, I believe, the Vietnam War, and he's come back and he's different, okay? He's having like some flashbacks. He's got some rage problems. So he doesn't want to deal with society because, you know, they're out to get him. The whole nation's out to get him. So they're going to move to Alaska and they're going to live off the land. And so they go to Alaska, and it's a lot harder than what they ever thought it was going to be like. But they move there and they find a home for themselves, and it's the first time that our young character has felt at home someplace. They've traveled so far, but of course her dad has some dark things happening, and things are just worse in Alaska, which, you know, they tell you, like, the days, so many days of darkness and coldness just really get to you, and so it ends up turning out not to be a good thing for her family. She makes friends there. There's some romance. It definitely had a lot of really good elements coming into it. I enjoyed it for the most part. I liked hearing about Alaska. I liked seeing the hardships that they endured. However, the same problem was happening over and over and over and over again. I'm just going to tell you straight up right now that it's violence. Her father is very violent. And the problem just keeps occurring, and it occurs and occurs and occurs, and everyone knows that it's a problem, but no one wants to do anything about it. And so this problem just keeps happening. So for a good portion of the book, like the whole middle section of the book, that is the only thing that is happening. At this point, the only thing I care about is this young girl's relationship with this boy that she has met. They are very close friends. You can definitely tell that there's like a development between them, but he's missing for most of the book. So we don't even get him until way later, and then that's when things got really good. The last portion of this book is so good because it is about her struggles of coming into adulthood, because we follow her throughout her whole life. It's her coming into adulthood and the relationship that she has with her mother and dealing with all these different emotions surrounding her father, and it's her just going through all these struggles as an adult and figuring out where she belongs and holding out for this love that she knows is just her one true love and things like that. And the relationship that she develops with her mother is, I cried so hard at those parts where they're just describing that mother-daughter relationship. It was just so good. That writing was good. The rest of it was kind of, you know, it was interesting. It was compelling at times, but it just dragged out so much on the same problem that just, like, there could have been a small portion about the times that it had happened instead of describing it every time that it happened for months and 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 months. I ended up giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. I thought some parts were compelling, but I really wish I had seen more from the story. I wish that we would have seen more character development, especially considering you're following this kid throughout her whole life. I wish that we would have seen, I don't know, just some different problems happening. I wish things hadn't ended so conveniently. Like, there's so many convenient things that happen in the end, and that kind of was over the top for me, especially for a story that had seemed so realistic up to that point. It was good, but I didn't love it. A 3.5 I thought was a pretty good rating, considering that so much of it was just such a boring slab of time and just not much developed during that. And I thought that the story just could have been shorter and it could have been presented better at times. So 3.5 is pretty good. I know why it won. There was a lot of hype around it. Kristen Hanna has kind of established herself as like a really high historical romance writer at this point. So I understand why it won. It probably wouldn't have been my pick. We still have so much further to go. So then the next thing is fantasy, and this was Circe, and I had never even heard of this freaking book. I was like, what the hell is this? Please don't be a series, and it's not. So this turned out to be a really, really good like timing, because I had gotten into the Trials of Apollo series, and Circe is based around Greek and Roman mythology, and this was just, I loved it. I loved it, honestly. This follows the story of Circe, and it's basically her as like a naive goddess, sorceress type thing, and it's her dealing with her father, Helios. He is the god of the sun, and that's her father, and like how just cutthroat and just unapologetic the like god and goddess community is, and the things that she wanted to do for love. And you find out like love is a theme of this, but it's not like your normal like, oh, I just you know, I have never ending love. It's much different. It's her like coming to realize the love that god and goddesses have to have, and basically it doesn't exist, and all this other stuff. But this was there's an interesting, I loved seeing this backstory. I love anything that gives like a god or goddess like this backstory that I haven't heard before. I'm not very familiar with the gods and goddesses, so this was so interesting to me. It was her and her exile on the island, and the different people that she met, and the different stories that she could tell, and the different feelings that she felt, because it seems like all the other gods and goddesses were just based on, like, they were so self-involved, and she seemed like the only one that was interested in other people's lives and doing things better for other people. There are some really hardships that she goes through, trigger warning for some rape scenes and violence and things like that. But it was such an interesting tale. I thought it was told pretty beautifully too. I know a lot of people have had problems. They think that it was kind of slow and boring, but I love the writing. I thought it was a more poetic writing. I liked that it was kind of slower paced, because as a god, you're gonna live forever, like you got a lot of time. So I kind of liked that about the book. Like, it just fit very well. I was very impressed with the writing. I really enjoyed the story. There were some parts that I had such a hard time like keeping up with, all the like relationship ties and family ties and stuff, so that was a little confusing. But for the most part, I really enjoyed this. I gave this a 4.5. I loved it. I would love to have a copy, but I hate the cover. I really enjoyed it. I would love to read more by Madeline Miller. Maybe eventually after I heard some hype, because I did have someone recommend it to me as I was reading it, and I was like, what were the freaking chances? Never even heard of this book, and someone just recommended it to me. But I really enjoyed it. Would I have picked it? I don't know, honestly. But I liked it a lot. So then, best of the best was The Hate That You Give. I'm not going to go into this because I didn't read it for this. I've talked about that before, but overall, when I read this, I had given it 4 out of 5 stars. Then we had Romance was the Kiss Quotient. This was on my TBR. I did own a copy. However, at the time, I could not find my copy. I was in the middle of moving. It was boxed up, so I ended up listening to the audiobook, and honestly, I feel like that might have been my downfall here, because the audiobook was not great in my opinion. Romance, I definitely need to sit down and read. I just like to soak in like certain parts. And listening to it just didn't help me at all. It made the characters sound almost cartoonish and over the top, and I just didn't enjoy them, I think, as much as I would have read it physically. So that was my own fault there. If you guys don't know, this is about a girl who has Asperger's, I believe, and she ends up hiring like a male escort to teach her about sex. She's had sex before, but she just doesn't enjoy it. So she hires this male escort to teach her about sex to see if maybe she can eventually enjoy sex. And, you know, she has a hard time being romantic with people and things like that. I had a lot of small problems with this. One, our main character is very attractive. She would have no problems. Like, she makes it out to be like she has this problem finding men, but she doesn't have a problem there. She does have a problem being romantic, and immediately it is fixed. Doesn't happen. As someone who does not like to be touched very often, especially in certain spots, as someone who is not super intimate and is very weird about their intimacy, I didn't enjoy how this just kind of erased that. At one moment she had a problem and the next moment she didn't, just because of one guy fixed it, and that just really bugged me because that's just not the case. Sometimes you have a limit and that limit needs to be kept. Some things you just don't like, and that's okay, and I just felt like this just got rid of that. Like, they were like, oh, you haven't liked being touched by other guys here? Well, here's this one guy that you're gonna like being touched by, and it's like, it doesn't work that way. Like, if there's some spots you don't like being touched, you don't like being touched that way. Very disappointed in that. That happened pretty early on. Plus, it was just so insta-lovey. It's like the moment they met, they both literally said the same thing within like 2 pages of each other. She was like, I saw it in his eyes, and then 2 pages later he was like, I saw it in her eyes, and I was just like, this is poor writing. This is poor writing right now. However, and I know people are like, you have to hold romance to a different standard because it's different kind of writing, and it's just like, I don't understand why I can't hold it to the same standard as anything else. Anyway, I did think the sex scenes in this were very well written. I just wish that this relationship hadn't been rushed. It hasn't been so insta-lovey. I can't say anything on the Asperger's rep if that was good or not, but the rest of the story just was kind of meh to me. It just didn't live up to the hype, especially considering all the good things people had said. It just wasn't as great to me as I thought it was going to be. Again, this could have just been because of the way that I listened to it instead of read it. I might try it again in the future with a physical copy, but the over cartoony feel didn't work. The poor relationship growth just didn't work. There was some very unhealthy characteristics in our male escort as well towards our main character. Like, he was very aggressive about some things. He was very possessive, even though like they weren't in a relationship. Some very red alarms going off, so I didn't care for that. I did give this 3 out of 5 stars just because the overall premise was like okay, and the sex scenes were good. So, okay, next we have the Sci-Fi, which was Vengeful. This was the second to the Villain series, and let me tell you, I absolutely loved Vicious. It was one of my favorite reads of the year so far, and Vengeful was a pretty decent second book. Let me explain. It's about Eli and Victor, who are best friends in college, and they are like pre-med, and for their thesis they have decided that they are going to focus on how to get like superpowers. Basically, they're called EOs, extraordinary people. So they find out the way to do this, and then they make themselves into basically supervillains, which is so exciting. I love hearing like their different sides of the story. They both basically have a way of thinking how things should work, but both of them are basically wrong. But the first one is how Eli is hunting down EOs and trying to kill them because of his religious beliefs, whereas Victor is been put in prison and he's finally gotten out, and he's set up like this like group of misfits to hunt Eli down. Vengeful is kind of the same but opposite. We get some more characters. We get to see more extraordinary people. We get to find out a little bit more behind them. It's kind of years down the road. I will say this one was harder to follow because the timeline jumps in both books, but this one just felt like it was all over the place. It was like 3 weeks ago, 2 days ago, 6 months ago, 4 years ago, and it was just so hard to follow. I had to keep like flipping all over the place to figure out where exactly I was supposed to be in the timeline and what was happening and how these things lined up. It's a unique way of telling the story, but so hard to keep like a clear mind about. I go into a little bit of a rant on my vlog, especially towards this, just because it was hard to follow, and I just feel like we didn't learn much about our characters. Like there's too much focus on everything else that's going on that I feel like we never get to see any type of development with any of our main characters, with any of the characters really. And I just wish that it would have focused more on the main storyline, because this just, I don't think it added anything to the story, really. It was still so interesting. It was so fun to read. I love Victor. I kind of love Eli, but Victor is my man. I have a weird attraction to him. I don't really understand it. So I like the story. This one just, I don't think it was as good. I did give this 4 out of 5 stars because I did really enjoy it. I just wish it hadn't jumped all over the place and we could have just focused on our main characters a little bit more. Next we have horror, which Elevation by Stephen King won. Again, I truly believe this only won because it was by Stephen King, because anyone who actually would have read this book would have known this wasn't horror at all. So this was my biggest pet peeve with this whole thing, because Elevation is not horror. There's nothing horrifying about it, nothing scary. It is about a man who finds out that basically his weight, like his physical weight, is going down, but he looks exactly the same. And he's terrified that he's going to reach this point where he's going to weigh nothing and possibly float away. It was 146 pages, and it was quite possibly one of the most boring 146 pages of my life. This is more about him kind of dealing with his neighbors. He has a lesbian couple as his neighbors, and they don't like him because he's kind of a jerk face to them. He's not trying to be a jerk face, but he's kind of a jerk face to them. And so he's trying to make it up to them, and they own a restaurant, and people in the town are just so mean to them. And so he's trying to make it up to them by like standing up for them and blah blah blah. And they kind of take it the wrong way, but it's him trying to like gain their friendship instead of dealing with this problem that's going on. Was it an interesting story? No, not really. It was very mundane. I feel like this was just because they were like, okay, Steven, we need another book to push out into the world. And he was like, well, here's this story that I wrote on this napkin this one time. And they were just like, good, let's roll with it, because it wasn't a very good story. The premise was interesting and I enjoyed the characters. I liked learning about the characters. I give it a 3 out of 5 stars. It's probably being generous, but I think that was more for the characters. Like, I enjoyed reading about the characters, his neighbors, and the different things that they were dealing with, but I didn't care about this problem that was happening, and the end of it was just kind of like, okay, I might end up lowering that, but I didn't hate the story. It wasn't like awful, it just wasn't great. So middle was probably okay. Then for humor, we have The Last Black Unicorn, and this is like the autobiography of comedian Tiffany Haddish. She has been kind of blowing up. She's in a bunch of movies now, and after reading this, I don't know if I will be watching any of her movies. I don't think that she is a bad person. I think that I enjoyed listening to it. There was a lot of parts that were so funny, and I loved hearing about her story. She talks about a lot of important things, like she looks back on life and talks about times when she had been like sexually harassed. However, she talks about it like it is a joke, and how basically she didn't know she was being sexually harassed, but the things that she talks about are so intense that I was like, how did you not know? Like, there's so many moments that she describes in life, and there were moments where I was like, can a person be this naive and dumb? Like, there's so many parts that I felt like she was just acting that way so that she could be the butt of a joke. And it ended up not being funny during those parts. There are parts that are hilarious. But there are so many darker parts that she goes into to try to make into a joke that just didn't work for me. There was one part that disturbed me greatly and was the main reason, like, I probably would have given this a 4 out of 5 stars. But there was one part that she goes into, it's like 2 hours long in the audiobook, where she talks about having sex with a mentally challenged man. That's fine. She even goes into, like, they need love too, like, things like that. Okay. She goes into describing it. She gives him a very inappropriate voice. She goes into describing, like, how he drools on her. She makes fun of him. She then goes back and is basically mean to him. She breaks his heart. I mean, I guess I'm spoiling this a little, but anyone could look this up and see where she has talked about this. And I was just so disturbed by this, that she was using this experience. It was more to make fun of and to humiliate than I think it was to enlighten, and it just so greatly disturbed me. The things that she went into describing, like, I understand that she was trying to be real, but at the same time I feel like she was just using it in her advantage, and just the things that she was doing, there was parts where she talks about how she was, like, pimping out women and stuff, and, like, I can't get behind any of that. I ended up giving this a 2.5. There were parts that were funny, but there were just so many parts that ended up, they just weren't things that I understood, that I could get behind. So that might be a difference between her and I, the way that we were raised. I'm obviously not oppressed where she may have been, so maybe that's a cultural difference that I am misunderstanding, but the things that she went into describing were just not things that I could agree with. So next we have nonfiction, and this is I'll Be Gone in the Dark. This was the hunt for the Golden State Killer. I know that this received a lot of hype this past year because they actually caught the Golden State Killer, or who they believed was the Golden State Killer. The author of this had actually died before the book was ever published, which I thought was probably the most interesting of the story. This just goes into, like, the details of some of the accounts and things of the Golden State Killer and the different people that he had killed and his way of killing people. And then it goes into a little bit about her life and how she was researching this and stuff. I was really interested in the parts that were about her, but the overall book didn't shine any light on the case or anything. I felt kind of bad because she has spent her life, like, gathering these details, and they've stated multiple times that they didn't even use any of that to catch him, and, like, it just, like, none of it really came together. It ran together a lot and confused me more than anything, and so much of it is repetitive that it just, like, I reached a point where I was just, like, tuning a lot of it out because it had just been stated over and over and over again. It just recapped itself at the end, which is all I really needed, honestly. So if it would have just been the recap and a little bit about her life, that would have been fine. But instead we had to go through all these pages and then get to the recap at the end, and that's basically where all the important information is anyway. So that was a little frustrating as a reader, but I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. It was interesting matter. I just didn't think it was the best setup, and I don't think it was kind of presented in the best way. I am more interested in her life than I was of the Golden State Killer, so 3 out of 5 stars. Then we have the memoir, which was Educated, and honestly, this was just more perplexing than anything. Like, I had no idea that there was people in the world like this girl's family. This follows Tara Westover, and she was raised in this community where her family basically didn't believe in like sending her to school because they thought the government would find out about them and all this other weird stuff. She didn't have like a birth certificate because they didn't want anyone to know that like she existed, and like her whole family's like that, and all the crazy shit that just happens in her family, like how abusive her family was, like physically and emotionally, how they just kind of like turned away from her because they didn't want to believe in the things that she was saying, like they had their own made up things, and like all this just insane things. I cannot believe that this family exists. Like they currently exist and they believe these things, and it just like was blowing my mind. I will say it's really hard to rate someone's life, especially when it's been one that's so extremely different from my own, one that I just can't wrap my mind around. I'm so perplexed that this family got away with so much crap. It was the same abusive problem over and over and over again, and that's kind of the main story. It's just a timeline of abuse that happens. It's not so much of her actually going to school until like way later in the book, which is what I was more interested in. I think like a recap of the things that, like the abuse that happened, may have been better just because it was like the same thing over and over and over again. Like in a way, I get it, but at the same time, I can't wrap my head around how this family just got away with so much shit. And like they became like extremely rich off of like telling people that they could heal them just with like hands and oils and stuff, and like that's still the way that they believe. And it's just like they like told her that the devil was in her just because she wanted to go to school and like things like that, and it's just like absurd to me. The story overall was so extremely boring, and I guess at the same time it was just like I just was in such a state of disbelief this whole time. I was more interested in her journey through school than I was hearing about the abuse over and over and over again and just the crazy shit that her family was doing. I dreaded reading this. I didn't think that it was written super well. I gave it a 2.5. I thought the things that she did was amazing, the way that she had to step away from her family and the hardships that she endured and things like that. But as a book, I just didn't care for it. 2.5 for something that I just dreaded reading was, I guess, pretty good. Then we have the biography, The Good Neighbor, and this is all about, apparently our new bisexual icon, Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers was a good guy. I'm not even going to deny that. This highlights that, but oh dear God, this book is not written very well. It is just all over the place. I wish that it would have been grouped by section of life. Like, it's not even by timeline, it's not by subject, it's just all over the place of Mr. Rogers' life. Like, it was the notes just thrown together and then published, basically. It talks about his religion in various parts, and it just kind of becomes repetitive. It only focuses on like the same episodes over and over again, even though he was on air for many, many, many years. It was weird because Mr. Rogers was kind of weird, I'm not even gonna lie. He would like call people and be the puppet, one of the puppets when he talked on the phone with them, and like he was Mr. Rogers even off the set and like at home, and like just some of the things were a little off to me. But I'm not gonna deny that Mr. Rogers was a fantastic guy. You get to hear that in the story. Like, it didn't feel like a completed story because it was all over the place. It just like didn't feel finished. It wasn't cohesive. I feel like I only learned a very little amount that I could have probably just looked up on Wikipedia about Mr. Rogers. Like, it didn't get deep into any subject. It was very surface level. It felt very biased. You get to hear no bad parts of Mr. Rogers, and like, again, he's a good guy, but everyone's got a little bit of a dark side somewhere. So, I don't know. It just felt biased, and I understand that we're trying to honor him in life, but I think if you're going to have a biography, it needs to be honest, it needs to be fully researched, and this just didn't feel that way to me. It also was so dragged out. This is like a 15-hour audiobook, and I just, like, I didn't need all that. Again, I just felt like it was all information that I could have learned off of Wikipedia. So, I like Mr. Rogers, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, but as a learning aspect, I didn't learn much. So then for science, we have The Rise and the Fall of the Dinosaurs. I was dreading this book the most of all because it's science nonfiction. I was like, this shit is going to be so dense. I love this book more than any other thing that I read. This was my favorite book of the whole challenge. This would have won best of best for me for the year. I'm not even kidding. If you would have told me this would have been my favorite book, I would have laughed in your face, because I would have been like, there's no way, I hate science nonfiction. How do I know? I've never read it until now, and I loved it. I highly recommend doing the audiobook and the physical book, because there's photos in the physical book that you can't obviously get in the audiobook. But this goes in between the life of this paleontologist and also looking back on the timeline of the dinosaurs. Very cohesive timeline, okay? You get before the dinosaurs, because the dinosaurs didn't always run the earth, okay? I just assumed that, but no. They were some small ass bitches at one point, and they did not rule the earth. Some crocodile things did, and this just like blew my mind. We get to learn about that. We get to learn about what happened to them, why the dinosaurs grew big. Did you know that they find dinosaurs literally all the time? I didn't know this. They found out that they have like feathers on it. Like, it goes into so much detail about the dinosaurs. I was like a 10-year-old boy with this newfound love for dinosaurs. I was like begging Brian to take me to a museum. I wanted to have that in the vlog, but we never got to go. I'm still waiting for the day that we get to go to a museum and see the dinosaurs. I love this. I couldn't stop talking about dinosaurs. I was telling my mom about them. I was telling Brian about them. I was telling my coworkers about them, and they were like, oh dear. So, I mean, I spent like days on days on days talking about dinosaurs. I finished this book in 2 days. It's a big book, but I loved it so much. I love dinosaurs. I think this is such a good book too if you don't know much about dinosaurs and you're trying to learn, because this, if it uses big words, it describes what exactly, but it's very easy to understand. It's not like over the top. I thought it was very realistic, like being like, okay, these are the things that we thought that we knew. These are the things that we know now. Who knows what we're going to find in the future? It was just so realistic. It was just so cozy. Like, I felt like I was sitting there and talking to this paleontologist, and he was just like, tell me like I was also a paleontologist, even though I don't know shit. I absolutely love this. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. By far the best written, the most entertaining, the most informative. It was, if I could recommend any book to give a try, even if you never wanted to try it, The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs is it. Y'all, I'm almost done. Just stick in there with me. I'm sorry if you can hear the vent, but I gotta get this video done because my ass gotta get to work. This is gonna be a long ass video. Okay, so next I have the graphic novel winner, which was Herding Cats. So I checked it out. Apparently it is number 3, but you don't need to read the other ones to understand, because this is not a storyline type of graphic novel. It's just a collection of comics that I've seen these like around on Instagram, Tumblr, things like that. These were fun little comic strips. They were fun. Some of them were funny. They were relatable. But I think if you're gonna have a graphic novel, it should be something with a storyline. The first half of this had comics in it, and it's just little things here and there. The second half was like loving yourself or something like that, or being a comic writer. I don't even remember. I just remember that it wasn't very useful. I didn't really care about the second half of it. Would I have picked this for the winner? No, probably not. I honestly don't know how this beats Saga in any way, shape, or form, except for maybe this artist has a lot of Instagram followers or Tumblr followers or something. And it's just very relevant. It's quick to our millennial culture. So I gave this a 3.5. It was entertaining, but it just wasn't anything super exciting for me. Next for poetry, and I knew I was dreading this because I don't like poetry, so take this rating with a grain of salt, just because someone who enjoys poetry might definitely give this a different rating. I had read The Princess Saves Herself in this one. I didn't enjoy it. I knew that I probably wasn't going to enjoy The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one. I honestly hated this even more. It was extremely men-hating, which, like, I get feminism, but men-hating is not it. It was, like, almost disturbing to read, the level which she, like, basically wanted to kill off all men. I thought it was awful, so repetitive, again, regurgitated words, the same poem kind of put in a blender and shoved out there time and time again. Nothing that really caused me to think, oh wow, this is beautiful, oh wow, this is thought-provoking. Most of the time I was like, oh yikes, extra yikes, lots of yikes. So, I don't know. It just, I understand modern poetry is just this very simplistic version of poetry, but it's not for me. I gave this 1 out of 5 stars. Next we have Debut, and for this it was Children of Blood and Bone. I have said that, you know, I kind of understand why this one, just based on the demographic. However, this takes place in a fantasy world where magic has disappeared. Our main character, who I already forget her name, and I just finished the book yesterday, she had to watch her mother be killed, and she ends up being placed on this quest to bring magic back to the land. In my notes, I literally wrote a clusterfuck of cliches. That's what this was. This was a fantasy novel that had every fantasy cliche you can imagine thrown into one, and that was the story. There were parts where I was like, oh, this is Fallen Kingdoms. Oh, this is Nevernight. Oh, this is Throne of Glass. And like, I understand that there are cliches, and there's cliches for a reason, and sometimes we seek out these cliches because we like them. They work. Putting them all in one just doesn't really work that well. Anytime there was a chance to be super, entertaining, anytime there was a call for action, we are pulled away into a point of view that is not involved in this action. The action is kind of shortened, it happens very quickly, it has a very quick resolve. This is also just a runaround game. It's literally them just like running away from the same thing this whole time, and they're not even very good at it. There's no character development whatsoever. This basically takes her the span of 5 days, 3 of which the characters are trying to kill each other, and the other 2 of which they're all just trying to have sex. It needed more character development. They only ever scream at each other. They never have like thoughtful conversations. I understand that they're supposed to be teenagers. There's a lot of angst here. But whenever you're in charge of saving the world, I would assume that you would have like a little more thoughtfulness to you. But it's so much back and forthness between we need magic, we don't need magic, we need magic, we don't need magic, that I was just like, what? Like, I don't even know if the author knows what she's doing at this point. It wasn't entertaining. It was dragged out. It was just so predictable, cliche after cliche. I wanted to love this so much. I thought that it had so many good elements that could have went somewhere, and each time something was brought up, I felt let down. Just time and time again. This book wasn't all that great. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And I honestly thought that was being quite generous. The world was beautiful, but there was a lot of parts that just didn't make no damn sense. Also, what was the point of adding animals? Because they literally had no use to the story. We forgot about them 90% of the time, and then they just conveniently were back with us. Why? So we have YA fiction, and for this it was Leah and the Offbeat. This is the second in the Creekwood series. The first is Love, Simon, or Simon versus the Homo Sapien Agenda. I really liked the Love, Simon movie. I decided not to read Simon versus the Homo Sapien Agenda because I'd seen the movie. I know who the character is. I know enough that I felt like I could have continued with Leah on the Offbeat. I was right. This follows the character Leah, and basically she is bisexual, and she hasn't come out to anyone, not even Simon, even though she gave him a bunch of shit about him being gay and not telling her. Reading this book was torture. It was absolutely torture. This is just about Leah being super angry and mean to everyone that she knows for absolutely no freaking reason. She's not a very nice person. She's not a very good friend, but yet she expects everyone else to be amazing to her. She ends up having a crush on one of their friends, and the friend conveniently decides that she's going to be bi too. I don't think that this was a good representation. I don't know anything about being gay or bi, but this just didn't seem like it was it. There was only one part that I felt like was realistic, and it's the part where she's angry about the side character. She thinks that they're pretending to be bi. Things just conveniently work out. But Leah is such an unlikable character. It is not a very exciting story. I just don't relate to this high school drama type setting. I don't relate to Leah because she's just so mean to everyone that she knows. She's just so unlikable. No one doesn't like you because you're fat or bi. They don't like you because you're kind of a bitch. Like, that's it. That's it. I don't even know if it was good fat rep. I don't know if it was good bi rep, but the overall story just did not work for me. I thought it was just too forced. It just wasn't overall a very good story. Again, this is for a younger audience, so maybe that's why I just don't connect with the angst. So I gave this, what did I give this? Oh, 2 out of 5 stars. It was my least favorite read in January. My fantasy was Kingdom of Ash. I'm not going into this. I've talked about this before. I did give Kingdom of Ash 5 out of 5 stars when I read it, but I did not think it should have been the winner. I do love Sarah J. Maas though. For middle grade, it was The Burning Maze. This is the 3rd in the Trials of Apollo series. I found that I really, really like the Trials of Apollo series. I like anything by Rick Riordan. They're just diverse. They're funny. They have serious undertones, but also just these like over the top, you know, middle grade humor. I love the characters. I love the dynamics of things. The storytelling is so good. I love how he can just weave this mythology into like modern setting. It just works. So this is about Apollo. He has been struck down from the godly world, Olympus, whatever. He's been struck down. He is now mortal, and he has to basically team up with some demigods in order to complete his quest to become a god again. I thought this was a trilogy, but I have found out that it's like a 7-book series, so I will be continuing because I've really, really enjoyed it. I flew through the series. It was so good. I think I gave all of them 4 out of 5 stars. I just love Apollo. I love his humor. There are parts where it's a little too childish, but you know, I'm not the intended audience. So, you know, but it's such a fun story. I enjoy it. It's just, I can see why it won. Middle grade fantasy is hard to nail, and Rick Riordan does it every time. And then the last one is the picture book, and this is I Am Enough. I did read a good amount of the picture books just to kind of get an idea. I mean, I'm a librarian. I read picture books as they come in. Mother Bruce is my fave, but I Am Enough is basically, this is a very lyrical story. Basically, it's about very diverse kids, and there are different races, different sizes, they got disabilities, religion and stuff, and it's a story of like, you know, no matter what you look like, what you do, what you love to do, you are enough. And it's cute, it's lyrical. I honestly think the story is more for adults than it was for children. Children would read this and just be like, oh yeah, you know, here's my friend, this is what I look like, things like that. They understand that. I don't think that that mindset comes in. Like, anyone who would be teaching their children this probably doesn't need to show this book. Like, they would already, the kids would be raised to understand that. It's more for, I think, adults who have this mindset that, you know, all these prejudices exist and things like that. So it's more like they need it, I think, more than the children need it. A child would not read this and think, this is a fun story. It's very more serious tone to it, and it's cute. I enjoyed it, but again, I think it's more for adults than it would be for children in just the overall message, not the story, because it's literally like 3 words to a page. But I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I don't know how else to rate a picture book. So would I have changed any of my answers to the winners? No, I would have not. I would not have. Wow, that took way, I've been talking too long. I wouldn't have changed any of my answers to the winners. I thought the things that I picked because I originally liked them. I thought they were good. So, yeah. I was more surprised at where my answers sat on, like, top 5 or not. For some of my other expectations, did I find something out of my comfort zone that I ended up loving? Yes. The dinosaur book was just my fave. So again, that would be one that I wouldn't have picked up on my own and I ended up loving. Another one probably would have been Circe. I don't think that would have been one that I would have picked up on my own, at least anytime soon. So at least 2 things that I read are things that I wouldn't have picked up that I really enjoyed. Although 2 out of 21 or 20 is not that great. I had said that I would be rating everything from a 3.5 to a 5, and as you can tell, that was not the case. These had some of my lowest rated reads of all time. However, my average was about 3.27 or something along the lines of that. So even my average wasn't even at a 3.5. But I do feel like there were still some good stories in there. I did rate 10 out of 20, at least a 3.5 or higher. So at least half of the books I did rate at a pretty good rating. It was just when I rated them low, they were really low. Were my expectations valid? Meh. I did find something that I love, but I didn't rate things as high as I thought I would. I didn't love as many things as I thought I would. It just, to sum up this experience, it was miserable. I was miserable trying to force myself to read these things. I will never do this again in the future. I don't recommend anyone doing this in the future. If something sparks your interest, go for it. But there's a reason that we have a taste in our books. And Goodreads is a popularity contest, which means it's not going to be for everyone. It's just going to be what has been marketed the most, what has been spread around the most. That's a little upsetting to know. I don't know if I will trust the Goodreads winners in the future. There were some that I enjoyed, but I wouldn't have picked as the winner. As you can tell, none of the things that I had picked won, so maybe that says something about my taste versus Goodreads' taste. Never do this again. I think if I would do something like this again in the future, I would do what Books and Lala did and just focus on one category so that I can vote properly in that one category. I don't think that I'm going to pick something that is out of my comfort zone, like the memoir. I didn't care about that. Nonfiction, probably not. So things like that I'm probably not going to look forward to again. This just, I wouldn't recommend this just because it was such a daunting experience, and I lost my love for reading along the way, which is so not what I want anyone to do. And while I did find something that I wouldn't have read otherwise, reading the other 15 terrible books did not make up for that. So yes, I read something that I truly loved, but did it make up for all those 2 and 1 and 3-star books that I just didn't care for? It's okay, but it was not a great experience. I wouldn't do this again in the future. I wouldn't recommend anyone doing this in the future, but here were my thoughts on the Goodreads winners. The popularity contest did not do me well. So, I hope you guys have liked this long ass, super secret, long awaited video that was not that great. Yeah, I put myself through this torture for you. For you. Don't do this at home, kids. If you guys have liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to see future wrap-ups with much better books from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!